The air hung heavy with a silence that felt too big for the grand hall. Even the whispers seemed to be swallowed by the velvet drapes and the polished marble. I stood near the back, a stranger among the impeccably dressed mourners. My threadbare coat a stark contrast to their tailored suits and designer dresses. Elias Vance, they called me. Just Elias. No last name needed when you're invisible to the world. My eyes were fixed on the casket, a gleaming monstrosity of dark wood and brass, adorned with a mountain of lilies. Inside, they said, lay Victoria Sterling, a woman whose name was synonymous with power, wealth, and an empire built on steel and whispers. And for a brief, bewildering time, a woman who had been a friend, or something like it. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that. The security guards had given me dirty looks as I slipped past the gates, pretending to be a caterer's lost delivery man. But something pulled me, a desperate, nagging itch in my soul that wouldn't let me stay away. The eulogies had begun, a parade of powerful figures painting a picture of Victoria Sterling that was both majestic and utterly foreign to me. They spoke of her business acumen, her philanthropic endeavors, her sharp wit. Each word felt like a tiny needle pricking at the memories I held, memories that didn't quite fit their grand narrative. I remembered Victoria differently. I remembered her with a smudge of grease on her cheek from a broken-down old car we tried to fix together. I remembered her laughing, a genuine, uninhibited sound that somehow cut through the weight of the city. I remembered her listening, really listening, as I rambled about my dreams of building things, of making a mark before life had. Well, before life had happened. My stomach rumbled, a familiar ache, but I barely noticed it. The ache in my heart was far more insistent. It felt like a betrayal to be here, to witness this elaborate charade, knowing what I knew, or rather, knowing what I felt. A famous senator was at the podium now, his voice a practiced baritone, recounting a story of Victoria's shrewd negotiation skills. I clenched my fists. It was too much. This wasn't the Victoria I knew. This was a carefully constructed image, a monument to a life I had only glimpsed from the shadows. And then, something snapped inside me. A hot, angry surge that pushed aside the fear, the shame, the gnawing anxiety of being an outsider. It was a primal scream of injustice, of a truth that was being buried along with the lilies. I took a deep breath, the stale air of the mansion filling my lungs. My voice, when it came, was hoarse, unpracticed, and probably sounded like a wild animal's cry in that hushed room. She's not dead. I roared, the words echoing off the high ceilings, bouncing back at me like stones. The senator faltered, his eyes wide with shock. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Heads snapped towards me, a sea of bewildered faces, some horrified, some just confused. A burly security guard, who had been lurking near the entrance, was already moving. His eyes narrowed, his hand reaching for something at his belt. But I didn't care. The words were out, and now I had to make them mean something. She's not dead. I shouted again, louder this time, my voice cracking with emotion. Tears pricked at my eyes, not of sorrow, but of a fierce, desperate conviction. Victoria Sterling is not dead. The silence that followed was even heavier than before, punctuated only by the hurried footsteps of the security guards. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, dismissing, ready to drag me out and throw me back onto the streets where I belonged. But I held my ground, my gaze still fixed on the casket, a silent challenge to the polished wood and the expensive lilies. Two guards reached me, their hands already clamping down on my arms. I didn't resist. There was no point. My message was delivered, however clumsily, however mad it sounded. As they began to pull me towards the exit, a new sound cut through the oppressive quiet. A faint murmur, then a rustle, then a distinct, sharp clearing of a throat from the very front of the room. My head snapped towards the sound. Everyone else did too. Standing next to the casket, a figure slowly rose, a woman. She was wrapped in a simple, dark shawl, her head bowed, almost hidden. But there was something familiar about the way she moved, the subtle grace in her posture, even in her grief. And then, she slowly lifted her head. My breath hitched. The guards paused, their grip on my arms loosening slightly. It was her. Her hair, usually meticulously styled, was a little disheveled. Her face, usually serene and composed, was pale etched with what looked like genuine exhaustion. But her eyes, those piercing, intelligent blue eyes, were unmistakable. They met mine across the expanse of the room, and in them, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years, recognition, and something else, a profound sadness. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it cut through the silence like a knife. The entire room erupted in a cacophony of gasps, murmurs, and outright exclamations. The senator at the podium had practically fallen into his seat. Reporters, who had been dutifully taking notes, were now fumbling for their phones, their faces a mixture of disbelief and utter pandemonium. The guards, completely stunned, released me. I stood there, swaying slightly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt lightheaded, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. It was real. She was real. My gut feeling, that insane, desperate hope, had been right. Victoria Sterling, the woman they were mourning, the woman they had declared dead, was standing right there, very much alive. A collective panic seemed to sweep through the room. People were shouting, pointing, some even screaming. But Victoria remained calm, her gaze still locked on mine. She took a step forward, then another, slowly moving away from the casket, away from the elaborate display of her own supposed demise. What is the meaning of this? A man in the front row, a prominent businessman, bellowed, his face turning a furious shade of red. "Victoria, explain yourself." She ignored him. Her eyes never left mine as she continued to walk, a slow, deliberate pace, towards the back of the room, towards me. As she got closer, I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the slight slump in her shoulders. This wasn't the invincible Victoria Sterling the world knew. This was a woman who had been through something profound, something deeply personal. Finally, she reached me. The crowd was still in an uproar, but around us a small bubble of quiet formed. She looked at me, really looked at me, her blue eyes scanning my worn clothes, my tired face. The years of struggle etched into my features. A single tear tracked a path down her cheek. "Elias," she said again, her voice stronger this time, but still laced with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "You always did have a knack for the dramatic." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, a familiar, almost mischievous curve that I hadn't seen in so long. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, choked with 100 unspoken questions, 1,000 conflicting emotions. Relief, anger, confusion, and something else. A glimmer of hope that had been extinguished for so long. She turned to face the stunned crowd, her expression now a formidable mask of defiance. The uproar slowly began to subside, as if her presence alone commanded silence. "My apologies for the inconvenience," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the shocked assembly. "But as Elias so eloquently pointed out, I am, in fact, not dead." A wave of renewed gasps and murmurs swept through the room. "The truth is," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the bewildered faces, "I needed to disappear. To truly disappear. From the public eye, from the relentless scrutiny, from a life that had become unbearable." She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "My doctors gave me a diagnosis a few months ago that was dire. They told me I had a rare, aggressive form of cancer, and that my time was severely limited. I chose to believe them." A collective gasp. Even I felt a jolt of shock. This was new information, a piece of the puzzle I hadn't even considered. "I wanted to die on my own terms," she explained, her voice tinged with a raw vulnerability I had never heard from her before. "I wanted to orchestrate my own exit, to escape the relentless demands of my life, to perhaps find some peace in my final days. So I faked my death." Her confession hung in the air. A bombshell dropped into a perfectly orchestrated funeral. "I went into hiding," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I sought out alternative treatments, unconventional paths, anything that offered a glimmer of hope. I needed to be free from the expectations, the obligations, the constant glare of the world, to truly focus on healing." She looked back at me, her blue eyes softening. Elias was the only one who truly saw through my charade. He saw a flicker of life where everyone else saw only death. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. The brief, almost accidental encounters we'd had over the past few months. A fleeting glimpse of her in a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop, her face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. A fleeting moment when our eyes met on a crowded street, and I felt that familiar jolt of recognition, even though I dismissed it as a trick of the light. A desperate wish. I had seen her. I had sensed her. And something in me, some instinct, some long-lost connection, refused to accept that she was gone. The doctors were wrong, Victoria announced, her voice filled with a quiet triumph. The treatments, the solitude, the chance to truly rest and heal. It worked. I am, against all odds, in remission. I am alive. The news spread through the room like wildfire, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and outright anger. The room was a whirlwind of emotions. But why the deception, Victoria? A woman, a prominent society figure, demanded, her voice shrill with indignation. Why put us all through this? Victoria's gaze hardened. Because I needed to know who would truly mourn me, and who would simply mourn the absence of my influence. I needed to see who would care about Victoria Sterling, the person, and who would only care about Victoria Sterling, the corporation. She took another step closer to me, reaching out a hand, and for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of her touch. Her fingers were cool, but firm, as she gently squeezed my arm, and I needed to know if there was anyone left in this world who would refuse to accept my death. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence, her eyes twinkled, a hint of the old Victoria returning. Turns out, there was only one. A wave of emotions washed over me, a confusing mix of validation, disbelief, and a profound sense of being seen. After all these years, after all the anonymity, the struggle, the feeling of being utterly invisible, she had seen me. She had heard me. The room was still buzzing, a symphony of bewildered whispers. People were still trying to process the impossible. But for me, in that moment, the entire world had narrowed to just us. So, she said, a small, knowing smile on her face, "What happens now, Elias? Now that everything has changed?" I looked at her, truly looked at her. Her eyes held a new depth, a new vulnerability that had not been there before. The years of power, of ruthless ambition, had taken their toll, but there was also a newfound clarity, a quiet determination. "Now," I said, my voice still a little shaky, but filled with a conviction I hadn't felt in a long, long time. "Now we live." And as the stunned silence slowly gave way to a cacophony of questions, accusations, and frantic phone calls, I realized something profound. My roar, that desperate, unpolished shout in a room full of polished lies, had not just brought a woman back from the dead. It had brought me back to life too. It had given me a voice, a purpose, and a connection to a past I thought was long gone. The grand funeral hall, once a monument to a supposed end, now felt like the beginning of something entirely new. And as Victoria, with a slight, almost imperceptible nod to me, began to address the bewildered crowd, I knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't be standing in the shadows anymore. I was part of this new, unexpected story, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I truly belonged.